The last stagecoach groaned like an old dying bull as it dragged itself up the narrow mountain pass, each wheel thumping over deep ruts carved by storms, boots and tragedies that had happened long before. Rana ever thought about climbing into that godforsaken wooden box with her single busted suitcase, a trembling resolve in her chest, and a prayer half-chewed between her teeth? The wind was sharp enough to cut skin, and the sky hung low like a bruised lid, about to collapse over the peaks that towered around her. Everyone said no mail-order bride lasted 1 week up here, not with him, not with the mountain man of Blackthorn Ridge, not with the hermit whose name was spoken in the town, below like a warning, like a curse, like a reminder that the world was built for the lean and the lucky, not for women like her, soft, wide, tired of being mocked for every pound she carried, and stubborn enough to climb into the unknown rather than live one more day, shrinking herself to make others comfortable. They said he'd sent the last bride running on day 3. The one before that had left on day 5, swearing she heard growling in the night, not from wolves, but from the man himself, and the one before that disappeared without much explanation, though the sheriff later found her in town drunk, shouting that the mountain spat her back out. But Rana wasn't them. She wasn't here to be delicate, dainty, decorative. She was here because she refused to be thrown away again, refused to return home and hear her aunt whisper to neighbors that poor Rana couldn't even get a mountain man to keep her. She wasn't here for romance. She was here for a life that didn't require her to apologize for existing. And if that meant dealing with a brooding lumber giant who lived in a cabin carved out of the wilderness, like an axe stroke against civilization, so be it. The coach stopped before the ridgeside, clearing with a violent jolt that shoved Rana forward. The driver, a nervous older man chewing tobacco like it owed him money, flicked his eyes toward the looming forest as though monsters lived inside it. Or one monster, at least. "You sure you don't want to go back?" he asked for the 5th time, voice cracking. "Ain't no shame in changing your mind." "Man up there, he ain't right." Rana clenched her jaw. "Everyone says that. 'Cause it's true," he spat. 3 brides gone. Some say he scared 'em. Some say well, I ain't saying anything. She drew a steady breath. "I'm staying." The driver shook his head, tossed her suitcase down, and muttered a quick prayer under his breath before whipping the reins and fleeing faster than a man his age should have been able to. Rana stood alone on the threshold, where the world of people ended and the world of him began. A thick, shadowed forest with trees like massive, ancient soldiers blocking out the horizon. The air smelled of pine smoke and distant storms. Every instinct she had, every instinct society had shoved into her, since childhood whispered, "This place isn't for someone like you." But she gripped the handle of her worn suitcase anyway and stepped forward. The path was narrow, winding, marked with freshly cut logs and the unmistakable marks of a single man, doing the work of 5. Her heart thudded with each crunch of gravel under her boots as the forest swallowed her. Then she saw it, the cabin, carved from raw timber, towering 2 stories high, roof patched with thick pelts to keep out winter's rage, smoke curling lazily from the chimney. A chopping block sat in the center of the clearing, an axe buried in a log as though someone had struck it with enough power to send a shockwave through the earth. And beside it stood him, Elias Thorne, the mountain man of Blackthorn Ridge, taller than any man she'd ever seen, built like a wall carved from storms and sorrow, beard thick and dark, arms roped with the kind of muscle that came from labor, not vanity, eyes like glacier ice, pale, cold, assessing. He looked at her the way a wolf might look at a stranger in its territory. Not aggressive, yet, but calculating, testing, deciding whether she was prey, threat, or something in between. "You're late," he said, voice deep enough to make the mountains listen. The coach was delayed. "Don't care." His eyes dragged slowly down her body, not in hunger, not in disgust, in analysis. A man used to measuring weight, durability, practicality, as though she were a tool he wasn't sure would hold up in a storm. She lifted her chin. "Are you going to stare at me or help with my suitcase?" You carried it this far because there were no other options. There still ain't. He turned his back to her, turned his back to his bride, and walked toward the cabin. She stood frozen, breath fogging in the cold air, heat rising beneath her skin, not from embarrassment but from anger. She wasn't a fragile little sparrow. She wasn't a project to fix. She wasn't here to be dismissed like a delivery that arrived damaged. Grabbing her suitcase, she followed him across the clearing. Inside, the cabin was unexpectedly warm, glowing with the heat of a massive stone hearth. Pelts covered the floor. Shelves overflowed with jars of herbs, dried meats and tools. A long table made of one solid slab of wood sat in the center, heavy enough to crush a foot if dropped. Ilias crossed his arms as she entered, the firelight turning his silhouette monstrous. "Listen," he said, "I'll be plain. The last three left. Not because I beat 'em, not because I scared 'em on purpose. They just weren't made for this place. It breaks people. Mountain don't care how pretty you are, don't care how soft, don't care what dreams you bring." Rana set her suitcase down, meeting his icy stare with a fire of her own. "Good thing I'm not here to impress the mountain." His jaw ticked. A muscle jumped in his cheek. A crack formed, the first sign she'd said something he didn't expect. "You think you'll last?" he asked. "I think I'll decide that, not you. Not the mountain." He studied her for a long moment. The wind howled outside like a warning. Inside, the silence grew thick and heavy, stretching between them like a rope, either waiting to be tied or ready to snap. "Fine," he said at last, "but I don't coddle. I don't soothe. I don't flatter." "Good," she replied. "I didn't come here for fairy tales." His eyes sharpened, something dangerous, not cruel, but intense, flickering in their depths. "Then let's see how long you last." A storm cracked open outside, rain slamming against the cabin roof, thunder rattling the window panes. Rana stood her ground. Ilias didn't look away, and somewhere deep inside the mountain, something shifted, as though the ridge itself acknowledged a woman who did not flinch, did not break, did not run, not yet, not ever, if she had anything to say about it. And Elias? He didn't know it yet, but the woman standing in his cabin, the one who arrived carrying the weight of every insult, every rejection, every battle she'd ever fought, was about to become the first bride who didn't just survive the mountain. She was going to change it. And him, forever. The storm didn't break until the middle of the night, and Rana barely slept in the small loft. Elias pointed her toward with a chin jut instead of words, the roof groaning under the weight of rain that felt like fists pounding from the heavens. Her mind churned with every crack of thunder, not from fear, but from stubborn determination, as if the storm were challenging her, and she was silently snarling back, "You'll have to do better than that." When dawn finally pushed through, pale and watery, she sat up to find a thin curl of smoke rising from the hearth downstairs. Elias was already awake, of course. He was splitting wood outside. The window, like the storm, had never happened. Shirtless despite the bitter cold, swinging the axe in brutal, punishing arcs that made the earth vibrate with each impact. He moved like a man trying to outrun something or bury something, and Rana watched from above with a strange mixture of irritation and curiosity. The last three brides must have seen this and mistaken it for savagery. She saw something else entirely: discipline, pain, routine, maybe even loneliness packed into every motion, like a secret he didn't want examined. She climbed down the ladder quietly but still startled him. He stopped mid-swing, glancing at her through the window with those pale, cutting eyes. "You're up," he said, as if it were an accusation. "It's morning," she replied. "People tend to get up for those," he grunted, not agreeing, not disagreeing, but acknowledging her presence in the least generous way possible, then resumed hacking the log, open with a strike that sent splinters flying. She stepped outside into the cold morning air, the smell of wet pine thick around them. "You don't waste time," she said lightly. "I don't waste anything," he replied, "especially daylight. Winter's coming? It's barely autumn. Up here, winter doesn't care what month the calendar says." The dismissiveness irritated her, and he could tell. A flicker of something like Amusement flashed in his eyes before he hid it behind another swing. "If you're gonna stay," he said, "you work. I don't feed dead weight." "I don't expect you to." "Good, then. Grab that bucket." He nodded toward a metal pail sitting by the pump. She did, though it was heavier than she expected. Elias didn't offer help. Of course he didn't, and she didn't ask. She pumped until the bucket sloshed full, carried it toward the cabin, and refused to let him see how her arms trembled. When she passed him, he said, "Water ain't gonna carry itself." "Good. Good thing I'm here, then." He didn't smile, but his eyebrow twitched like the mountain had just been told no for the first time in centuries. Inside, she set the bucket down and wiped her hands, noticing how the place felt both rugged and strangely cared for. The shelves were meticulously organized. Tools were arranged with precision. Pelts had been cleaned thoroughly. For a man everyone whispered was feral, he kept a home like someone who understood the weight of solitude, someone who controlled everything. He could because life had taken too much he couldn't. She was still studying the space when he came in behind her, wiping rain off his shoulders. "Breakfast," he said simply, tossing a small sack of dried meat onto the table. She stared at it. "This is breakfast?" "It's food." "Barely," he shrugged. "If you want better, make better." Challenge accepted. Rana rolled up her sleeves, dug through his shelves, and found enough ingredients to cobble together a hearty stew. Beans, potatoes, a bit of dried venison, herbs someone had painstakingly gathered and dried, likely him. Elias watched with that same unreadable expression, as though he couldn't decide if she was wasting precious supplies or performing sorcery. When she placed the steaming bowl in front of him, he stared at it suspiciously. "It's food," she said, mimicking his tone. "Eat it." He took a slow bite. Then another. Then another. He didn't compliment her, of course he didn't. But she noticed he finished every drop, scraping the bottom like a man who rarely ate something crafted with intention. "You cook," he said at last. "I survive," she corrected. Big difference. Something shifted in his eyes again, not warmth exactly, but recognition, a spark of respect that hadn't been there yesterday. He opened his mouth to speak when a distant howl cut through the forest, long and low, echoing across the ridge like a warning carved into the wind. Elias's posture stiffened, every muscle locked. "Wolves?" she asked. "Too deep a pitch," he muttered. "Something bigger." Her heart thudded. "What's bigger than wolves?" "Nothing you want to meet." He moved quickly, grabbing his rifle, checking the chamber, scanning the tree line. The tension rolling off him was different this time. Not irritation, not habit, but alertness sharpened by knowledge she didn't have yet. He turned to her. "Stay inside." "Why?" "Because I said so." "That's not a reason." He stepped closer, towering over her, eyes hard as winter ice. "You don't know this place," he said quietly. "But it knows you, and it tests outsiders. Last night wasn't just a storm. It was the mountain shifting. You'll make it sound alive." "It is." He moved toward the door. "And it doesn't like visitors." She grabbed his arm before she could talk herself out of it. He froze, staring at her hand. "Elias," her voice softened. "I'm not the type who stays behind and hides. That's exactly the problem," he muttered. But he didn't pull away. Not immediately, and when he did, he didn't bark, didn't threaten. He simply said, "Fine, then stay close. And don't do anything stupid." They stepped outside, the forest unnervingly still, branches dripping from last night's storm. Elias scanned the ridge with trained eyes, rifle raised. Rana felt the weight of the wilderness pressing on her, thick and ancient, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. Suddenly, a heavy rustle came from the bushes to their left, followed by a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the ground. Elias moved in front of her instinctively, body tense, stance wide, gun aimed. "Get back," he whispered. But Rana didn't move. Instead, she watched as something massive shifted between the trees. Too big for a wolf, too fast for a bear, too deliberate in its stalking. Elias's jaw clenched. "Damn it!" he hissed. "Not this early in the season. What is it?" He didn't answer, Because the answer wasn't safe to speak aloud. Leaves snapped, a shadow lunged, and Elias fired, one deafening crack that echoed through the ridge. The creature retreated with a furious snarl, crashing deeper into the forest. Silence followed, heavy, grim, unresolved silence. Elias lowered his rifle slowly. "We need to reinforce the cabin," he said. "Tonight? And if it comes back before then? Then you'll find out why the last 3 brides ran." He met her gaze, then really met it, seeing not just her stubbornness, but her fear, her courage, her refusal to shrink. "But you," his voice dropped, roughened. "You're not running, are you?" "No," she said, pulse pounding. "I don't run." Something dangerous and unspoken passed between them. Not desire, not yet, but recognition. The mountain might break weak-willed brides, but Rana wasn't one. And Elias Thorne, for the first time in years, realized he was no longer alone in a war he'd fought too long by himself. Behind them the wind howled again, as if the mountain had just realized it finally had an opponent it couldn't scare away. Rana lifted her chin. Elias tightened his grip on the rifle, and the ridge, wild, ancient, unpredictable, shifted again, preparing for what came next. She wasn't leaving. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. And the mountain would have to deal with that.